Listen, there's one mistake that will cost you everything when you're dealing with an avoidant. One sentence, one admission that seems loving in the moment, but destroys your power forever. It's when you admit you need them more than you need yourself. Why is that deadly? Because avoidants don't process intimacy the way you do. The second they sense you're dependent, they feel trapped. What you think will bring you closer actually pushes them further away. Now here's the truth. You don't build connection by collapsing into weakness. You build it by standing in your strength, by being whole, complete, and powerful before anyone else even walks into the room. When you say, "I can't live without you," you surrender your identity, you hand over your power, and an avoidant doesn't want responsibility for your happiness. They want freedom, and freedom respects strength. So instead of confessing desperation, show choice. Instead of saying, "I need you," live in the energy of "I choose you because I am already complete." That's where influence begins. That's where love grows. If you want lasting connection, don't chase, don't beg, don't confess weakness. Lead with self-respect, boundaries, and clarity. The person who values themselves first is the one who can never be abandoned, because they never abandon themselves. Never admit desperation to an avoidant, or to anyone. The moment you do, you've already lost. But when you stand tall, when you claim your own worth, the world, and the people in it, rise to meet you. Avoidants fear vulnerability because, deep down, vulnerability feels like exposure to them. To someone with an avoidant attachment style, being emotionally open can trigger a deep sense of danger, as if opening up will automatically lead to pain, rejection, or loss of control. This fear is not something they consciously decide. It is wired into their nervous system through years of conditioning, past experiences, or childhood dynamics where closeness may have felt unsafe. When you reveal too much too soon, especially your deepest fears, insecurities, or absolute reliance on them, they don't feel drawn closer. Instead, they feel the urge to withdraw, to protect themselves from what they perceive as overwhelming expectations. You may think that sharing your rawest emotions is a way to create intimacy, but for them, it feels like stepping into a trap. Now, this doesn't mean vulnerability is wrong or that you should avoid being authentic. It means timing, delivery, and balance matter. Vulnerability is powerful when shared with someone who values it, but with an avoidant, your vulnerability must be paired with strength, boundaries, and self-assurance. If you walk into that space saying, "Here are my wounds and I need you to heal them," the avoidance mind interprets it as pressure, a weight they were never ready to carry. But if you walk in with, "Here is what I feel, and I'm strong enough to handle it with or without your validation," that changes everything. They may still hesitate, but they will respect that you're not handing over your entire sense of worth for them to manage. Avoidants fear vulnerability because they often equate it with loss of freedom. When you share your innermost truths, they instinctively think it comes with strings attached. They assume you're about to ask for more closeness, more commitment, or more reassurance than they feel capable of giving. That's why it's dangerous to overshare in the wrong way. It creates an emotional imbalance where they feel suffocated, and you feel rejected. But if you shift your perspective, you can reframe vulnerability into something that demonstrates strength. For example, instead of saying, "I'm terrified of losing you, and I don't know what I'd do without you," you might express, "I value this connection, and I'm committed to being honest even though it's not always easy for me." The first statement exposes desperation and dependency, while the second reveals courage and clarity. One pushes them away, the other earns their respect. You see, the avoidant is not afraid of you. They are afraid of their own feelings. They're afraid that once they open the door, they won't know how to regulate what comes flooding in. Your job is not to fix them, not to overcompensate for their walls, and certainly not to prove that you're safe by exposing every part of your soul at once. Your job is to maintain your own emotional center. Vulnerability without boundaries is self-abandonment. Vulnerability with strength is authentic power. And when you embody that balance, even an avoidant begins to sense safety, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. So remember this: vulnerability is not the enemy, fear is not the enemy, but revealing too much too soon without the anchor of self-respect That is the trap. If you want to build a bridge with an avoidant, do not confuse vulnerability with desperation. Share, but share from a place of wholeness. Reveal, but reveal with dignity. Because when your vulnerability comes wrapped in strength, you transform it from something that threatens them into something that inspires them. And that is how you rise above the cycle, hold your ground, and maintain both your connection and your power. Neediness is a trigger for an avoidant because it immediately activates their deepest fear of being trapped, overwhelmed, or suffocated in a relationship. When someone says, "I can't live without you," it might sound romantic in movies, but to an avoidant it signals danger. That phrase, or any energy like it, communicates dependency, and dependency to them feels like loss of freedom. They interpret it not as love but as a demand, as if you're handing them the keys to your entire happiness and expecting them to drive it forever. This doesn't make them cruel or uncaring. It's simply how their nervous system is wired. They crave closeness on some level, but the moment they sense you need them in order to feel complete, they instinctively pull away. It is not rejection of you as a person. It is rejection of the role they think you're assigning them, caretaker of your identity. This is why neediness, whether spoken directly or shown through actions like constant reassurance, seeking, excessive texting, or emotional outbursts, often backfires with avoidance. The more you try to cling, the more they retreat. The more you prove you need them, the more they feel like they're losing themselves. And here's the paradox. The very thing you think will bring them closer, confessing your dependence, is the very thing that makes them run. This dynamic can be frustrating because deep inside you might genuinely feel that your emotions are valid and natural. You want closeness, reassurance, and connection, but the way you present that desire matters. To an avoidant, subtle shifts in your energy speak louder than words. If your communication carries the weight of desperation, they interpret it as a threat to their independence. The solution is not to suppress your needs, but to express them with strength instead of weakness. When you can look at an avoidant and say, "I value this connection, but I also value myself," you communicate choice rather than dependency. That language, both verbal and nonverbal, allows them to breathe. It reassures them that being in a relationship with you doesn't mean losing themselves. And ironically, it is in that space of freedom that they are more likely to draw closer. Because at the end of the day, humans are attracted to strength. Emotional strength doesn't mean you never feel pain or never express fear. It means you can express those emotions without collapsing into helplessness. If you believe that someone else holds the key to your emotional survival, you've already lost your balance. The greatest power you can bring into any relationship, especially with an avoidant, is the ability to say, "I want you, but I don't need you to define me." That is not coldness, it's clarity. It's choosing love from a place of fullness, not emptiness. And when you stand in that space, you break the cycle of neediness that triggers avoidance. You're no longer trying to pull love out of them. You're inviting love to flow naturally, without force. Here's the truth. When you show neediness, you hand over your power. When you show choice, you elevate the relationship. Avoidants respect people who respect themselves. So if you want to build something real, never position yourself as someone who cannot survive without them. Instead, stand as someone who thrives with or without them, and chooses them because they add value, not because they complete you. Clarity beats clinging because, in any relationship, clarity communicates confidence while clinging communicates fear. When you cling to someone, you are essentially saying, "I don't trust that you'll stay unless I hold on tightly." That energy feels heavy, suffocating, and unsustainable. To an avoidant, it reinforces every one of their fears about relationships: that love equals loss of freedom, that closeness equals control, that being with someone means losing themselves. But clarity flips the script. When you are clear about who you are, what you stand for, and what you will and will not accept, you immediately change the dynamic. You show that you are not grasping to be chosen, you are choosing, and choice creates attraction far more than clinging ever could. Clarity is magnetic because it tells the other person, I know my worth. When you communicate with clarity, you set boundaries without apology. You can say, I enjoy our connection, and here's what I need to feel fulfilled, without guilt or fear. You can express standards in a way that doesn't demand or beg, but instead invites. Avoidants may not respond well to pressure, but they do respond to clarity. Why? Because clarity removes confusion. It shows them that you won't play games, you won't manipulate, and you won't suffocate. They may resist intimacy, but they deeply respect certainty. Clinging, on the other hand, erodes respect. It tells the other person that you are prioritizing them over your own dignity. And the irony is that the more you cling, the more they doubt your strength, which is the very thing that would have attracted them in the first place. Think of it this way: love without clarity feels chaotic. You are left guessing and constantly trying to hold on to someone out of fear. Love with clarity feels grounded. You're not trying to control the outcome. You're simply standing in your truth. In practical terms, clarity means being willing to walk away rather than betray your values. It means not staying silent out of fear of losing them. It means refusing to water yourself down just to keep the connection alive. And here's the paradox: when you show you are not afraid to lose them, you become more valuable to them. That's because true power in relationships lies in self-respect. When you cling, you hand over your power. When you are clear, you claim it back. Avoidants often test whether you will collapse into insecurity or stand tall in your truth. Clarity signals to them that you can handle yourself, which lowers their fear of being consumed. Clarity also builds trust because they know you will say what you mean, not bury your needs until they explode. Over time, clarity creates the very safety that can draw an avoidant closer, not because you chase them, but because you showed them you are unshakable. So if you want to transform your relationships, drop the clinging, replace it with clarity, stop asking, how do I make them stay? And start asking, how do I honor myself while inviting them to stay? The shift from clinging to clarity is the shift from fear to power. And when you make that shift, you stop begging for connection and start embodying it. Your power is in self-sufficiency because the moment you position yourself as someone who cannot function without another person, you lose influence, respect, and balance. Self-sufficiency is not about isolation or pretending you don't care. It's about cultivating a sense of wholeness so that when you enter a relationship, you do so as a complete person, not a broken half searching for completion. Avoidants are especially sensitive to dependency because it feels like weight on their shoulders. If they sense that your happiness, stability, or self-worth relies entirely on them, they begin to retreat, not out of cruelty, but out of fear of being consumed. What changes the dynamic is when you approach them from a place of choice, not need. When you demonstrate that you are capable of standing strong on your own, but you still choose them, it reframes the relationship into something healthier and more attractive. Self-sufficiency also builds inner confidence. If your identity revolves around someone else, every action they take or don't take has the power to shatter you. But when you ground yourself in your own values, goals, and sense of purpose, you become unshakable. That unshakable presence is magnetic. It communicates that you are not here to drain them, you are here to share life with them. Self-sufficiency also prevents the toxic cycle of overgiving and resentment. Many people think that by showing how much they need someone, they will inspire loyalty. In reality, it often has the opposite effect. People respect those who can thrive on their own, and they respect them even more when those individuals still choose partnership. The key is balance. Self-sufficiency does not mean shutting people out or never relying on anyone. It means you build a strong foundation within yourself so that your happiness does not collapse when someone pulls back. For avoidance, this balance is crucial. If they see that you are emotionally resourceful, they feel less pressure, which ironically makes them more willing to engage. Your power is not in convincing them to stay. It is in being so secure in yourself that you could walk away if needed. That inner strength creates a dynamic where love is no longer about desperation, but about mutual respect. Reframing rejection is one of the most powerful shifts you can make in your mindset, especially when dealing with avoidance. When an avoidant withdraws, it is easy to internalize their distance as a reflection of your worth. You might think, they don't want me, so I must not be good enough. That belief system can spiral into self-doubt, insecurity, and unhealthy patterns of chasing. But the truth is, avoidant behavior is rarely about you. It is about their fear of intimacy, their discomfort with vulnerability, and their internal wiring that makes closeness feel threatening. Their withdrawal is not proof of your inadequacy, it is evidence of their internal conflict. Reframing rejection means understanding that their retreat is a signal of their limitations, not your failure. Instead of asking, "Why am I not enough?" shift the question to, "Why do they fear connection?" That perspective shift allows you to see their behavior without attaching it to your value. It also prevents you from reacting with neediness or self-blame, which only reinforces their distance. When you can reframe rejection in this way, you maintain your emotional stability and prevent yourself from chasing validation from someone who cannot provide it. This mindset also empowers you to make clearer decisions. If you interpret rejection as a reflection of your worth, you'll keep trying to win them back to prove your value. But if you understand that rejection is about their fear, not your identity, you free yourself from the trap of overexertion. You recognize that your worth remains intact, whether or not they can handle intimacy. That recognition gives you the freedom to either patiently navigate the relationship with boundaries or walk away without collapsing. Reframing rejection puts the power back in your hands. Instead of seeing rejection as a wound, you see it as redirection. A moment of clarity that shows you where the other person's capacity ends and where your growth begins. Leading with strength instead of surrender is the ultimate way to maintain influence in relationships, especially with avoidance. When you surrender your power by confessing desperation, overgiving, or tolerating behaviors that undermine your self-worth, you create an imbalance where the other person feels control without responsibility. Avoidance, in particular, may not abuse this intentionally, but the dynamic naturally tips against you when you give away your strength. Strength in this context is not about dominance or coldness. It is about self-respect. It is about communicating, through words and actions, that you know your value and will not compromise it for the sake of temporary closeness. Leading with strength means setting boundaries, even when you fear losing the person. It means saying, "This is what I need and this is what I will not accept," instead of shrinking in silence. It means holding your ground with calm confidence, not emotional outbursts. Avoidants respect strength because it reassures them that you are not going to collapse into dependency. When you show that you can stand on your own, they feel less pressure, and paradoxically, that makes space for them to approach. But when you surrender your power, when you beg, cling, or confess helplessness, you confirm their fears that closeness equals captivity. Strength is not harshness. True strength is calm, steady, and unwavering. It is the ability to love someone deeply without losing yourself in the process. It is choosing connection without sacrificing your identity. Leading with strength builds trust, respect, and stability, and in the long run, it protects not only your relationships, but also your sense of self, because no matter who stays or who leaves, you remain whole. And wholeness is the foundation of lasting power. Avoidants fear vulnerability because to them, vulnerability is not about intimacy, it is about danger. It feels like opening a locked door only to risk being invaded. Many avoidants grew up in environments where emotional expression was unsafe, dismissed, or even punished. So when you reveal your deepest fears or insecurities, their nervous system doesn't interpret it as closeness. It interprets it as pressure, even threat. That's why when you admit things like, "I'm terrified of losing you," or "I need you more than anything," what feels like intimacy to you can feel suffocating to them. They withdraw not necessarily because they don't care, but because their survival instincts are triggered. The lesson here is not that you should never be vulnerable, but that you should combine vulnerability with strength. Vulnerability without boundaries is fragility, but vulnerability with self-assurance becomes authenticity. When you can express feelings without collapsing into dependence, you show them that intimacy doesn't equal suffocation. That balance can create an environment where even avoidants begin to relax and feel safer in connection. Neediness is a trigger because it signals to them that you are about to hand them responsibility for your entire emotional state. An avoidant fears entrapment, and nothing communicates entrapment faster than desperation. When you say, "I can't live without you," you think you're expressing love, but what they hear is obligation, a demand to carry your happiness on their shoulders. Even subtle behaviors, like constant reassurance, seeking overtexting or panicking when they pull away, communicate the same message: you need them to function. And for someone wired to equate closeness with loss of independence, that energy sends them running. But here's the paradox: when you show them you don't need them to survive, but you choose them out of strength, you become infinitely more attractive. People respect those who stand firmly on their own 2 feet, and avoidants especially need to feel that you are capable of self-regulation. You don't have to suppress your emotions, but you do need to communicate them from a place of stability. Saying, "I value you and I want this relationship," carries far more power than saying, "I'll fall apart without you." One invites connection, the other chokes it. Clarity beats clinging because clarity communicates confidence, while clinging communicates fear. Clinging says, "I don't trust you'll stay unless I hold on tight." But clarity says, "I know my worth, and I know what I will and will not accept." That difference changes everything. Avoidants are hypersensitive to pressure, and clinging feels like pressure no matter how softly it's delivered. But clarity provides structure. When you clearly state your needs, your boundaries, and your values, you take the guesswork out of the relationship. You don't need to play games or manipulate, and you don't need to suffocate them with constant demands. You simply stand firm in who you are. Clarity is magnetic because it shows self-respect. It sends the message, "I want you here, but I don't need to chain you here." Ironically, when you demonstrate that you can walk away if necessary, you often inspire them to walk toward you. Clarity creates stability in the relationship dynamic because both people know where they stand. Avoidants may resist closeness, but they crave honesty and consistency, and nothing builds that faster than being clear, calm, and direct. Your power is in self-sufficiency, because when you cultivate your own sense of wholeness, no one can use your vulnerability against you, and no one can take away your peace by withdrawing from you. If you make another person your source of stability, you place yourself in a fragile position, dependent on their choices to define your worth. Avoidants will sense that fragility instantly, and instead of feeling closer, they will feel burdened. But when you stand in self-sufficiency, when you show that you can thrive with or without them, they feel relief, not pressure. It reassures them that being in relationship with you doesn't mean losing themselves. Self-sufficiency is not coldness. It is balance. It means you can enjoy intimacy without needing it as a lifeline. It means you can share your life without abandoning your identity. And it means that if someone pulls away, you remain grounded, not desperate. That is true power, because when you don't need anyone to complete you, you can love from choice, not from fear, and that kind of love is the only kind that lasts. Reframing rejection is one of the greatest skills you can ever master, especially when dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. When they pull back, go silent, or distance themselves, your first instinct may be to personalize it. You may think they don't want me, therefore I must not be enough. That thought alone can spiral you into fear, self-doubt, and even behaviors that reinforce the very distance you fear. But the truth is, their withdrawal is rarely about your worth. It is about their wiring, their fear of intimacy, and their belief that closeness equals loss of freedom. When you reframe rejection as their response to their own internal struggle rather than a judgment of your value, you remove the sting of personal attack. You realize it's not about you, it's about them. This shift empowers you to stay steady instead of scrambling for validation. When you see rejection as information rather than condemnation, you gain clarity. Their withdrawal shows you their limits, not your shortcomings. It reveals the areas where they struggle with connection, not the areas where you lack worth. And when you interpret it this way, you stop over-investing in proving yourself and start deciding what is truly right for you. Instead of begging for them to stay, you evaluate whether their capacity matches your needs. That is power, choosing from a place of strength rather than reacting from a place of fear. Reframing rejection transforms it from a wound into a signal, a signpost that helps you navigate your relationships with more wisdom and dignity. Leading with strength instead of surrender is the natural extension of this mindset. Too often, people confuse love with sacrifice, believing that giving up their boundaries or dignity will earn loyalty. But in reality, surrendering your power doesn't create closeness. It creates imbalance. Avoidants in particular do not respect desperation. They may not say it outright, but they feel safer with someone who holds their own ground. Strength is not about being rigid or controlling. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to compromise that essence for temporary connection. When you lead with strength, you communicate, I am whole. I choose to be here, but I will not abandon myself in order to keep you close. That kind of energy commands respect. Strength is steady, calm, and unshakable. It is not about fighting or dominating. It is about standing tall even in the face of rejection. Avoidants respond better to someone who doesn't crumble under distance. When they pull away and you remain composed, you show them that you are not dependent on their every move. You are secure enough to hold your own. That steadiness disarms their fear because it reassures them that intimacy with you does not equal captivity. In contrast, when you surrender your strength and beg for connection, you reinforce their fear that being close to you means losing their freedom. Reframing rejection and leading with strength go hand in hand. Together, they prevent you from giving away your power. They allow you to love deeply without collapsing into desperation. They give you the clarity to see someone's actions for what they are, a reflection of their capacity, not your value, and the resilience to stand firm in your worth. This combination creates a dynamic where you no longer chase love but embody it. You no longer fear rejection because you understand that your identity is not on trial in someone else's behavior. And you no longer surrender your dignity for scraps of attention because you know that the strongest love you can ever offer begins with the love you give yourself. The moment you give away your emotional power, the dynamic is lost because relationships thrive on balance, and balance only exists when both individuals stand in their own strength. Too often, people think that admitting helplessness or confessing that they cannot live without the other person will create closeness. In reality, it destroys respect, especially with avoidants who are hypersensitive to anything that feels like pressure or control. The instant you hand them the responsibility for your happiness, they feel trapped. They do not see it as love. They see it as a loss of freedom. That is why the most important stance you can ever take in a relationship is to lead with strength, not surrender. Strength in this context is not arrogance or cold detachment. It is the ability to express love while still honoring yourself. It is the decision to share your heart without abandoning your dignity. It is choosing someone because they add value to your already whole life, not clinging to them out of fear that you cannot survive alone. When you give away your emotional power, you enter a cycle where their behavior dictates your worth. If they draw close, you feel valuable. If they pull away, you feel worthless. This instability keeps you in a constant state of anxiety, and ironically, it pushes them further away. But when you stand in your power, you break the cycle. Their presence becomes a gift, not a lifeline. Their absence no longer shakes the ground beneath you. Avoidants respect people who respect themselves. They may resist intimacy, but they are drawn to stability. When you lead with strength, you send the message that you are not trying to consume them or control them. You are simply offering connection from a place of confidence. That changes everything. Instead of feeling burdened, they begin to feel safe. Instead of fearing that being close to you will cost them their freedom, they sense that you can stand on your own, which lowers their defenses. This doesn't guarantee that they will suddenly transform into secure partners, but it creates the best possible environment for genuine connection. Surrender, on the other hand, erodes everything. When you collapse into desperation, when you beg, when you confess that your world cannot go on without them, you give away the very energy that attracts. Love does not flourish in desperation, it flourishes in freedom. The more you surrender your power, the more you communicate that you are willing to lose yourself to keep them, and that message is poison to respect. Over time, it conditions them to see you not as an equal, but as someone who can be taken for granted. That is why surrender never leads to security. It only leads to imbalance and pain. True strength is calm, grounded, and unshakable. It doesn't mean you never show emotion, but it means you show it with ownership. You can say, "I feel hurt," when you withdraw, without crumbling into, "I'm nothing without you." You can admit vulnerability without abandoning self-respect. That blend of openness and strength is what makes intimacy sustainable. It allows you to connect without losing yourself. It ensures that no matter what happens, you remain whole. The secret is this: the person who values themselves first is the one who can never truly be abandoned. Because they never abandon themselves, when you hold that truth, you no longer fear rejection, and you no longer surrender your worth for fleeting attention. You lead with strength, and in doing so, you transform the entire dynamic. You stop chasing, stop begging, stop confessing weakness, and instead stand tall in your power. That is when love becomes real, not because you surrendered yourself to keep it, but because you respected yourself enough to protect it.